Welcome to Kent Academic Exchange. I am Benga Odunton. I like to discuss international law and international politics, and it doesn't get more exciting than now for enthusiasts of international relations and international law in relation to African states. Let's do an update on the forbidden coup, the coup that has taken place in Niger, and the reactions by the Economic Community for West African States. There has been a major development here, which needs an update. The ECOWAS has decided to activate its standby force, which means we are going to have, presumably, the use of force by a regional economic community organization. And it's pretty wild, unexpected, and in many ways exciting for enthusiasts of the topic. We do need to look at some of the legalities in this area. For instance, we need to understand the international legal basis of ECOWAS in its decision. How binding is this decision, especially on dissenters, those states that have dissented from military action? We need to consider the right of the Nigerian president to commit troops to war. We need to understand the international obligations of Nigeria, the incorporation or non-incorporation of ECOWAS decisions in Nigerian law. Are there any possible conflicts? Then we need to consider the politics of things. We need to also look at the military side, the military issues. And I think I'll just encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel. It will encourage me to make more of these short videos in reaction to international issues concerning Africa and beyond. So let's take it one at a time. The first issue is, what's the background? The background is that Niger experienced a coup on the 26th of July, 2023. The president, erstwhile President Mohamed Bazoum, was removed from office by his presidential guards, led by a certain General Abdurrahman Chiani, who led the Nigerian coup and has led to this pretty peculiar Nigerian conflict and crisis. The West African bloc, ECOWAS, reacted to this development by preparing itself for military action after inviting the military junta to negotiations and immediate levying of sanctions by Nigeria unilaterally. Niger was given a deadline, 7-day deadline, to remove itself from its illegitimate occupation of power by coup. That deadline ended on Sunday, 7th of August 2023. And as a result, 2 members of the ECOWAS body, principally Mali and Burkina Faso, who incidentally both are suspended, under suspension from the ECOWAS body because they themselves had experienced coups in their states, and the states had been found undeserving to continue in its membership of ECOWAS. So Mali and Burkina Faso dissented to the action. That might even be expected, and they declared that they would back the junta that has taken power in Niger if a military invasion does ensue. Pretty important stuff. The international legal basis of ECOWAS, if we are to look at it, is first and foremost, we need to accept that ECOWAS does exist, and it's a body that was brought into existence by the heads of states and governments of 15 West African countries. that established this body in 1975 in Lagos. ECOWAS has been closely aligned to Nigeria, closely aligned to Lagos, part and parcel of the leadership that Nigeria has been showing on the African continent, and it's been very good success so far. The ECOWAS Treaty was reviewed in 1991 and continues to operate till today. The authority of the heads of states is stamped and expressed through the apex body of the ECOWAS, known as the authority. The authority of the heads of states is the apex body within the ECOWAS organization, and it is composed of heads of states and governments, and the authority is responsible for the general direction and control of the community, and takes all measures to ensure its progressive development and the realizations of its objective. The ECOWAS also has a chairman. The current chairman is President Bola Ahmed Tinubu of Nigeria, very new to the job as president in Nigeria as well, a seasoned politician, accomplished administrator. He is in charge of the ECOWAS body now as chairman, and that body, the ECOWAS, issued a final communique yesterday, roughly 24 hours ago, nearly 24 hours ago. It's a final communique arising from a second extraordinary summit of the ECOWAS authority, which was summoned by the chairman, and they met in Abuja. This communique decided, and this is where things get very interesting, against all predictions by a lot of people who thought that this is about to die out and there would be no military action and the junta will have a lovely life and existence in Africa. I always knew this wasn't going to be. And yes, the communique reads that the political situation in Niger is intolerable to the ECOWAS body, and the body has decided to activate the ECOWAS standby force with all its elements immediately. Those are the words, the precise words used, to activate the ECOWAS standby force with all its elements immediately. Now, what's the ECOWAS standby force? The ECOWAS standby force is a standby arrangement made up of military, police, and civilian components, and is a contraption which one can conclude is consistent with Chapter 8 of the United Nations Charter, which provides for regional peace and security arrangements. What this means is that perhaps the most respectable international organization for international relations, the most authoritative, is the UN. But the UN Charter itself recognizes that some bodies, some organizations represent regions of the world, and the Charter has made arrangements and made provisions for that by saying that these regional peace and security arrangements are recognized and can engage in collective action as well. So there you go, you have the authority of ECOWAS to exist. In international law, you also have the authority of ECOWAS to intervene for peace and security purposes in this region. The ECOWAS standby force is expected to be able to conduct strategic and operational level planning for the multi-dimensional, multi-theater operations that may arise out of any exercise of command and control and deployment of forces by the ECOWAS body. And this is under the African, this is also tied to, in its operations and in its legality, to the African Union mandated peace and security architecture. So yeah, there you have it. ECOWAS first port of call in West Africa, tied to the African Union mandated peace and security architecture. African Union itself tied to the United Nations peace architecture. The international legal basis for the ECOWAS and its actions can also be found in the way the body operates. The body operates by, especially the authority, operates by making decisions. So Article 9 of the ECOWAS Treaty says that the authority shall act by decisions, and depending on the legal matter, these decisions can be arrived at through unanimous or consensus or by a two-thirds majority of the member states. I'm not really sure which of these took place yesterday, whether it was unanimous, whether it was by two-thirds majority, but it was a valid resolution that was passed, a valid decision made, and obviously the states like Burkina Faso, Mali, who have said they are not going to support this decision and they might even join with Niger, would not have been party to that decision yesterday, but they could not have been parties because they are on suspension, which is something I'm going to address very shortly. They are on suspension. They would not have had a say, and they should not have had a say. They have an horse in this race. They are military regimes themselves. They would not want to see the end to a military regime that helps to justify their own very existence. So the practice is, and the law, the ECOWAS law, and the usual law in international organizations is that decisions are binding on the member states and institutions of that community. So the decision of the authority of the ECOWAS is binding according to Article 9 of the ECOWAS Treaty, is binding on all states, binding on all states and institutions of the community. Well, what room therefore is there for dissenters, those states that may want to dissent, those states that may not like the development? Very little room. First, those that are on suspension are thoroughly on suspension. Liabilities and obligations will reflect that. But if they really do not want to be part of the arrangement again, they will have to withdraw. Article 64 of the ECOWAS Charter, ECOWAS Treaty, it's a treaty rather than a charter. Article 64 of the treaty says that any member state wishing to withdraw from the community can do so, but shall give notice to the executive secretary, and that notice will be a one-year written notice. Such a notice has not been given by any state, to the best of our knowledge, up until this point. And even if a notice is served now by any of the states, including Niger itself, presumably, the position of the law is that for the period of 1 year, such a member state will nevertheless observe the provisions of the treaty and shall remain liable for the discharge of all obligations under the treaty. So there you go. Withdrawal at this stage will not help if the withdrawal is meant to address and redress something that has just happened. It takes a 1 year cooling off period under which you still have all the obligations of membership. Who are the expected dissenters in any case? I think I mentioned a bit about that. Mali is not pleased. Guinea may not be pleased. Burkina Faso are not pleased. But their history, as I said, explains why they are not pleased. Mali itself was suspended from ECOWAS in May 2021, following a second military coup within 9 months of each other. This is why, for those who think peace, 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 we just want to have peace, we just want to have normalcy, we don't want to rock the boat, I would say expressly that when you start having military bodies, military governments in charge of countries in West Africa, in Africa, anywhere really, you still will not have that peace. You will continue to have very shaky regimes. There will always be coups and counter coups. Those coups and counter coups will always lead to the international system having to recognize and re-recognize governments. I mean, you murder sleep once you commit a coup. You really murder sleep, and both the person who has committed the coup and the country remain on edge. So Mali was suspended after a second coup. Guinea was also suspended in September 2021, shortly after a military coup took place in the country. Sanctions were then placed on both Guinea and Mali in September of 2022. September of 2021, and again in January 2022. These sanctions did not have any serious effects. The military governments there are still in place. The sanctions placed, as well as the suspension and the negotiations, did not work, leading, I would say, to the signals sent to the military boys, if one may call them that, in Burkina Faso. So there was a coup in Burkina Faso in January 2022. You can see exactly how these problems are escalating and developing. In January 2022, haven't seen that not much has happened against Guinea and Mali. Burkina Faso went the junta route as well. And again, Burkina Faso was suspended from ECOWAS following a military coup there. Immediately, I think we can conclude that this is spreading. And I suppose we can also conclude that both negotiation and sanctions have not been working. A lot of people keep saying that the way out of this is negotiation, the way out of this is more sanctions. I am always a friend of negotiation, mediation, use of good offices. These are all things dictated by membership of the UN and the Charter of the UN. We are supposed to resolve our international disputes this way, according to Article 33 of the Charter. However, where they are not working, as clearly it has not been working, surely international law is not left without solutions. And one of the solutions clearly is the use of collective action by the international community, regional organizations like the ECOWAS, and this is also very well known and legal in international law and in international relations. That's the part that I would want to discuss in terms of the relevance and legality of the international actions by ECOWAS. Now let's consider what the Constitution of Nigeria says. What's the legality of the actions of the Nigerian president to commit coups, big faux pas there, to commit troops to war. Can the Nigerian president commit troops to war? The rule here is the 1999 Constitution. The rule is given by the 1999 Constitution. The power to declare war is vested in the president of the country. The president of Nigeria is the chief executive authority of the country. He is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He is, as provided by Section 130 of the Constitution, the person who assumes imperial control over the military and armed forces of Nigeria. But Section 5, subsection 4A of the Constitution says that the president cannot declare war without the authority of the resolution of the National Assembly at a joint session. So both the House of Representatives of Nigeria and the Senate of Nigeria need to jointly pass a resolution to allow a war. Those are the express dictates of the Nigerian Constitution, and the Nigerian Constitution is the supreme law of the country. Any other law that is inconsistent with the Constitution is null and void and of no effect whatsoever, to the extent at which it may be inconsistent with the Constitution. However, that provision also has an exception to it, and this is where things get interesting and more or less get on the side of the president of Nigeria and the authorities that rightfully wants to engage in military action here. The president can, under subsection 5 of section 5, decide that the Nigerian state will engage in limited combat outside Nigeria if he is satisfied that the national security of the Nigerian state is under imminent threat or danger. So, notwithstanding the provisions of subsection 4 that I discussed earlier on, which is quite clear, the president under the Constitution is given the power, in consultation with the National Defense Council, which I presume has been done in Nigeria already on this matter, and perhaps will be done again if things are moving ahead. The president may deploy members of the armed forces of the Federation on a limited combat duty outside Nigeria if he is satisfied that the national security of the state is at threat. A lot of issues to unpack here. Well, maybe I should try to simplify it. The test really is one in the hands of the president in conjunction or in consultation with the National Defense Council, whether there is an imminent threat or danger. The test is really that of the president, whether, in quote, he is satisfied. What's the length of a string? When do you get satisfied about something? It's in the eyes of the beholder. So the test is really that of the president. The length of a string is the estimation of whoever is deciding the length of a string. And to that extent, I think the president just needs to explain his behavior, his conviction, if need be, to the houses of parliament, or particularly to the Senate, if he has taken this decision, because that's what the other thing the subsection says, that when the president acts like that, he can do so provided that the president shall, within 7 days of actual combat engagement, seek the consent of the Senate. So there again, there are a lot of things to unpack here. When does actual combat engagement begin? When you surround the state, you move to its borders, when you enter that state, but combat engagement hasn't started, that may run into weeks. So a lot of practicalities still have to be determined here. When does a combat engagement begin? Whenever that starts, then the president has 7 days. So presumably, I don't see any reason why, if a proper concerted effort is taken against Khartoum, sorry, that's definitely not Niamey, definitely not Khartoum. If concerted effort is taken on Niamey, there is a possibility, or we can rule it out, that the government in Niamey may run out before the end of that 7 days. At any rate, federations, democratic states across the world have a lively discussion in this area. The presidents of America have been severally invading countries for combat without the express, acceptance of the houses of parliaments in America. They have very similar rules. the powers of war and peace in America is also a very lively area of discussion, even in the UK as well. Presidents have been known, prime ministers have been known to go to have military engagements abroad without the approval of their parliaments. These laws are quite similar in democratic areas. The spirit of the drafters of the constitutions is really to keep the power of declaring war as closely monitored as possible by the houses of parliament. But in nearly all leading democracies, there is enough ambit left for presidents to go out and start an engagement and then come back for ratification of that decision in the houses of parliament. So yes, there you have it. The president can act and then get it recognized later. Very possible that the parliament then refuses. It'll be interesting to see what happens then. However, the other thing to consider is Nigeria bound by the decision of ECOWAS? Yes, the principle of subsidiarity applies to regional economic communities just as it applies to continental unions like the African Union, like the European Union. This is the reason why the UK had to leave, or said it had to leave, the EU, because of the principle of subsidiarity. You are bound when you are a party, when you're a member to an international organization, to give effect to the decisions of that organization. Is part of the sharing of sovereignty, which takes place in a globalized world. So it's an international obligation that Nigeria, if it has entered into a treaty with the ECOWAS, just as it has with the EU and the UN, and this treaty or law or convention has been ratified by the Nigerian state and has been domesticated. And I can promise you that Nigeria has ratified and domesticated its obligations with the ECOWAS for decades now. So Nigeria is indeed under an obligation to deploy our military for the contribution to the peace and security of other member states. That's just the way the rule works. The politics we'll come to discuss later on, but you don't rely on your own internal laws to disobey international obligations, where those international obligations have been entered into willingly, when particularly they have been domesticated into law. On this note, I do believe that once the Senate retroactively gives approval to the actions of the military limited combat rule under the 7-day rule, the Nigerian state will be fully behind the obligation. I don't think it's worth going too deeply into this, but perhaps we might need to also explain the difference between the monist and dualist view of international law. When does international law and international obligations become binding? Do they get binding immediately, or do they get, do they have to be ratified by the states? I've already said that Nigeria has ratified the ECOWAS treaty, but generally, most states are both, to some extent, partly monist and partly dualist. Section 12 of the Nigerian Constitution has already said that no treaty between the Federation and any other country shall have force, except to the extent that they have been enacted into law. That has already been settled. We have the ECOWAS obligations enacted into law. And we also have the commitment of the Constitution of Nigeria, under Section 19, that the foreign policy objectives of Nigeria will be to promote and protect the national interest of Nigeria. The best person to determine in an executive manner the national interest of Nigeria right now is President Ahmed Bola Tinubu. and he's moving in that direction. And the legality, I think, is quite tight. Nigeria, also under its constitution, does promise to respect international law and to obey treaty obligations. So I think that wraps it pretty much up that this is all going to take place under legal rules. That's the law. Now let's talk politics. What's the politics of things? The politics of things are quite difficult, pretty interesting. What we are having in West Africa, particularly now, is a spreading of gangsterism by irregular dictatorial military regimes. It's a rash that is spreading very fast. There is the risk of contagion. In those countries where these changes have taken place, all is not settled there. That's one thing people need to remember, that things don't just settle because military governments are in power. In Mali, it couldn't be more turbulent. Similarly, in Burkina Faso. Indeed, a recent study has just shown that in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, where the military is in charge, the problems with terrorism are increasing. That Mali and Sudan are hotbeds of military action, but lots of gangsterism and human rights abuses, Wagnerization, extension of Ukrainian politics into African affairs. That's taking place more under military regimes. So leaving military regimes in charge is not the panacea to peace as much as people would like to think. What we really are experiencing is that a few people, sometimes you can count them on the tip of your fingers, are holding entire countries to ransom. If we take Niger, for example, Niger has only 12,000 military men. And these 12,000 military men, more or less, have snatched a country of 25 million people. That is one of the, no matter what you say about democracy, in democracy, you will have more than 12,000 people voting. So on a democratic representation point of view, it's disastrous that a few men, sometimes less than the population of a university campus, hold entire countries to ransom and change their destinies for decades. And that's just not correct, and that needs to be checked. So Mali, Sudan, Central African Republic, all destabilized theaters of military operation. Let's look at the future. Before we even look at the future, let's look at what the other countries outside the region may be thinking and doing about this. I know for a fact that the Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, Victoria Nuland, has just left Niger. She's been there on a diplomatic mission. And I think what we had was that the decisions and the discussions there took place and they typified it as frank and difficult discussions. Now, frank and difficult, in quotes, is the diplomatic expression for things are not going well at all. Frank would mean, perhaps in the case of Victoria Nuland, she probably went there with threats and ultimatums. Difficult would perhaps mean that the other side have refused to accept all that, and things are in a state of stalemate, and everyone has gone back to his barracks, so to speak. What is Russia thinking and doing about this? Perhaps difficult to say, But if we read the tea leaves, if we listen to what Russia itself has said officially, and if we listen to what Russian sympathizers have said, I see no backing for the assumption that a lot of people have that Russia and Wagner are behind this coup or have accepted to help in any way. If you listen to people like Alexander Makoris in his blog and vlog that I listen to a lot, it's called The Duran, pretty qualitative stuff, high-level discussion, massive knowledge there, pro-Russian, pro-Russian. He believes that Wagner has no presence in Niger, and Wagner is not even looking forward to any presence there. He even said that Putin is slightly embarrassed by the whole episode. He has nothing to do with it, and the Russian state has responded very categorically by saying that the coup should not have taken place. They've condemned the coup, and they've also said that they would rather prefer the former president back there. So clearly, what seems to be happening is that the military coupists are trying to pry international relations apart to find cracks and crevices to exploit. They would love to have Wagner on ground, but the fact is that Wagner is not on ground. Wagner has not been on ground. If anyone has been on ground, it has been the French, who have a base in Niger. If any other person has been on ground, it has to be the Americans, who also have a drone base in Niger. They have men on the ground, they have boots on the ground. Interestingly, the training of the Niger military has been handled by the West over the last many decades. So the West has deep ties with Niger military. All this tell me that what the junta is trying to do is to exploit current international relations in the hope that it might get some cover. I don't think it's going to get that cover. It might have been promised cover by Mauritania, sorry, not Mauritania, by Mali and the Burkina Faso. But I don't know how they can really expect to take that promise to the bank. These are other poor countries as well. Mali has only one single air transport vehicle, just one. It's not surprising. I've known Mali for quite a while. Mali in the 80s, up to the mid-90s, had one or two tarred roads in the entire country, massive country. So these are not countries that you can rely on. They are unable to cope. Niger itself has been unable to cope with ragtag armies of Boko Haram. Niger is not in a position. Mali is not in a position to stand up to a 250,000 strong Nigerian army. Mali is not, Niger is not in a position to stand up to the Senegalese army. These are some of the top militaries in Africa. And people turn around and say, well, Nigeria has been struggling with Boko Haram. Yes, Nigeria has been struggling with Boko Haram. Every country, no matter how big, struggles with asymmetric war to do with ragtag terrorists who disappear into the bushes, into the community. They don't have a uniform. They don't have a barracks. Massively different thing when you are discussing combat between states. States have armies with uniforms. They have barracks. They have capitals to protect. So if the capital of Niger is gone, no matter what anybody thinks about it, that government is out of power. And I refuse to see the possibility that the 12,000 strong, if we may call it that, Nigerian armed forces are all lining up for the political ambitions of a military man to be the military president of the country. I don't think so. I don't think they are unified. I don't think they will be unified in the face of superior and overwhelming presence of other militaries who know exactly what to come from. They know where the presidential palace is. They know where Niamey is. They know where the barracks there are. They know what to knock out and stop communications. I predict, I'm not an expert in military issues at all. Perhaps in a sense, your guess is as good as mine, but I do predict that in at most 2 months, the government of Niger, the military government would have fallen, and people would have started running in different directions. Those who will go into exile will go into exile, and those who would have been arrested would have been arrested. There is no way. Nigeria is quite accomplished at this. The ECOWAS itself is quite accomplished at this. They got it done in Gambia. Gambia may be said to be much smaller than Niger, but at the end of the day, it was about the government there seeing that it was overwhelmed and encircled. Although there might be help given to Niger by countries like Algeria, which also is not promising to help out and is possibly on the side of Niger, but I don't see Algeria spending its hard-earned money to prop up one military regime in another country, ready to face not only the African states that are against that body, but also the international community. All those states that are opening their mouths big now are doing that just for now. They will soon be asking for aid from the usual sources. These sources will run that aid dry, and if anything, they would be seeing all kinds of hostilities. So I think the support for Niger is quite thin on the ground. It's the strength of the Niger military is very much exaggerated. They're just 12,000, please. The fact speaks for itself. There are 12,000. The policemen that operate in southwest of Nigeria alone are more than 12,000. The military men in some barracks in some states or regions of Nigeria are more than that. And there's no trick they're going to pull from under their sleeve. Their masters, the people who train them, the people who arm them, it's not Russia, it's the West. They are the people that they have now aggravated. I think we're in a pretty good place to put a stop to this aberration. And I think, in conclusion, I really think that this military intervention is necessary. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and ECOWAS are on the right path. They are on a path that is dictated by international law. They are on a path that protects the right to democracy, which is a human right as of today. The vast majority of the world operates in a democratic fashion and under democratic systems. Democracy is not perfect, far from it. The democracies we have in Africa are not perfect, far from it. But military regimes are not the answer to any of the problems at all. Military regimes are zero on human rights. Military regimes are zero on actual competence in government. We've had them in Africa for decades, and they are part of the reason why Africa is still perhaps economically and structurally backward. They are part of the reasons why Africa was under the thumb of the West, because it was quite easy to put in place salty figures like Idi Amin, terrible figures like Abacha in Nigeria, who, apart from their idiocy, are quite tied to the hands and the strings of foreign powers. So anyone who truly loves Africa will not encourage a system where a military regime will be in power and we will not be able to remove them. We know that negotiations and sanctions does not work with them. If you need any proof of that, look at Burkina Faso, look at Mali, look at Guinea. They have all refused, even in the face of sanctions. The sanctions have not been working. Let's try something else. Let's try it on this occasion, and then let's make sure that this does not spread. Anyone siding with coup plotters should have a word with him or herself, should have a quiet time and find out, why am I really doing this? Why would I want to risk my country's future in the hands of military men who are trained to kill, and they are not keeping their country safe as things are, but want to come and rule a complex country. You don't want to be on the wrong side of history on this, and I think ECOWAS is doing the right thing on this occasion. Thank you for listening to me. Please subscribe, like, and share.